The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi there, and good morning, and welcome to today's workshop, where we're going to be talking about unlocking the value of your retail data to drive business growth. So, my name is Chris Atterwell. I'm CEO of Search Laboratory, and I'm joined today by David Howlett, who, in his role as Data Solutions Architect, works with our clients to help identify ways to use data and technology to improve the performance of their digital campaigns. I've gone one further there. In terms of an agenda, so things we're going to be looking at today, firstly, how to realign your digital marketing to the real KPIs that drive business growth. We're also going to be looking at how to break through a growth plateau that many companies experience. How to incorporate first-party data to build a profit-focused growth strategy, looking at how to define a roadmap to increase digital marketing maturity, and then finally building a foundation that enables a profitable return on your digital marketing budget. A few points about housekeeping. So the workshop will last around 30 minutes in total. We do have some time at the end for questions, so if you do have any as we move along, please feel free to submit these via the chat, and we'll pick them up later. For anybody who's not aware of Search Laboratory, we are an integrated digital marketing and technology company, and we're passionate about searching for the truth in data to help our clients grow. Our purpose in life is to connect the best digital talent and technology to enable the world's most ambitious companies to win. There's two parts to that. So people is a really big part of that for us. We employ a team of around 150 incredibly talented people between offices in the UK and the US, and we're proud to have been featured in the Sunday Times top 100 companies to work for in 8 of the past 10 years. And then the second part is obviously technology. We develop our own technology, and we also work closely with leading tech partners like Facebook and Google to make sure we're maximizing the value that our clients get from using their platforms. So specifically relevant to the topic of this workshop today, we are one of a handful of Google marketing platform sales partners in the UK. So we work closely with the Google team on supporting clients across their premium analytics and ad tech stack. So that's predominantly Google Analytics 360. But also Search Ads 360, Display and Video 360, and Campaign Manager, as well as working in Google Cloud Platform with BigQuery on some of those advanced data projects. So to give a bit of background on the topic of today's discussion before I hand over to David, some people may be familiar with the work that Google have been doing with Boston Consulting Group around digital maturity over the past few years. BCG carried out some research in 2018, working with a large group of advertisers around the world to analyze their digital marketing campaigns and assess their level of maturity and their use of data, while also looking at how that corresponded to campaign performance. They then subsequently revisited this same study in 2021 to update the findings and the insights. As part of the study, they established this 4-tier framework for advertising, for measuring rather, an advertiser's digital and data maturity based on a range of factors. And they called these 4 stages: nascent, emerging, connected, and multi-moment. With the first 2 on the left representing a fairly low level of digital maturity, and the second 2 on the right, a high level of maturity. So what they then found in 2018 was that around 90% of companies sat in the middle 2 tiers, while only 2% of companies were fully digitally mature at that time. If we fast forward to 2021, what we can see is that not only have more companies moved into that top tier, but also that there's been a 30% increase in the number of companies who now sit in the high maturity bracket, so the top 2 tiers on the right there. But why is this all important? Well, what they found was that those companies in the high maturity tier, so those 2 tiers on the right, were able to increase their revenue by an average of 18%, while achieving a reduction in spend of on average 29%. So some really, really good returns on investing in digital maturity and data maturity. One thing that we found through working with clients is that the path towards digital and data maturity can be long, complicated, and obviously in some cases quite expensive. And yes, if you sat in that lower nascent tier and you're looking at what you need to do to reach those top tiers, it can be a lot of work. You know, it can look like quite a mountain that you have to climb, and potentially a significant investment to get there. What we found is that actually, you know, it's not about shooting for the stars. It's not about how do I go from step 1 to step 4 overnight. It's a process that can take time, and most importantly, it's about assessing where you are now and determining what you can be doing that's better than what you're doing now. So what can you be doing tomorrow that's going to be better than what you're doing today? And really about how do you achieve those incremental uplifts in performance by improving how you're using data, improving what you're doing around digital, and just starting out on that journey. So that's probably a good time to hand over to David, who is going to share some practical advice on some of the ways in which you can do this and some of the things that we've done with our clients to do that. Over to you, David.
Thank you very much. So I wanted to kick off with some of the fundamental business questions that get asked a lot of digital marketing teams and when you're building out your projections for that year, for example. And the two questions that we see really commonly are, how can we invest more money how can we invest more to grow? And that naturally leads into, what should our target be? And you'll find that one sets the other. If you set a target of 500% ROAS, that will naturally cap how much you can invest to grow. And the key thing really that we're covering today is that they're not really the right question to be asking. That the questions to be asking around what actually fundamentally drives the business. So for every £1 I spend, how much profit do I make? How does that profit change if it's a new or existing customer? If selling product A versus selling product B change that? And the answer to them is almost always yes. Products do have different values, and we're going to go into that in a bit more detail throughout this. What we find across the industry, I think particularly with sort of the market conditions the way they are, and probably the sort of the direction we're going, is that eventually you are going to hit this plateau, particularly if you focus around just revenue KPIs, ROAS, CPA, for example. Naturally, you'll reach a point where the business is still having aspirations to grow, maybe 20% this year, for example, but you're asking your digital teams to get more and more out of something that's heavily optimized, and then they get stuck here. And what we're not saying that you're never going to end up on this plateau, but what we're saying, what we're going to be talking about today is how to really unlock your data to push it as far away into the future as possible. And that really comes down to using your first-party data. It's a massive topic in the industry right now, and particularly with the way cookies are going. It's going to become very prevalent in day-to-day conversation. So to dive into that Boston Consultancy Group Digital Maturity Framework in a bit more detail, what I've done is I've framed this talk in the webinar today around it. So at the foundation here, the nascent level, is where we actually do see quite a lot of clients. Typically, where you'll find yourself at is you're looking at single channel performance. So you're not really talking about attribution. You're probably using last click. You might be using first click, but as you'll see through here, that they both sort of have the same issues, and they're not really a good solution. And fundamentally, what you're doing is you've maybe got PPC campaigns, and you're optimizing towards a revenue against them with no differentiation in value, depending on which product you sell, or if it's a new existing customer, for example. Now, the key next bump that we really push our clients towards, and really what we're looking to push you guys towards on this webinar, is this emerging step where you're still not solving the attribution issue. You're still looking at it from a single channel perspective. But now you're talking about lifetime value, you're talking about profit, and you can actually create ROAS targets around profit, which we'll come on to in a bit. But fundamentally, you're answering that business question of, well, how much more can I invest? Because you've determined how much money you're actually making through your digital channels. And that conversation becomes much easier to set those targets and work out how much you should be spending throughout the year. Once you go beyond that and you get towards this connected phase, you're actually now tackling attribution. And the reason why we don't tackle attribution before this point is because of, you can use first click, last click, a data-driven attribution, but you're limited to the cookie and you're not doing anything to propagate that cookie throughout the user journey. So it's going to be very flawed. Once you've built a data warehouse, you can actually join your CRM data with GA and the various different platforms and and start to attribute the user journey across online and offline. And when I say offline, I really do mean any touch point offline. That could be phone calls, it could be stores. You know, if someone purchases in a store and they give you an e-receipt, that should be tied up to the user journey they've had online, particularly if you've maybe got an app where people have to log into to view your products on your digital store, for example. And lastly, we've got multi-moment here, and this is really the future of the industry. We've got a few clients who have reached this stage, but it's definitely not common at this stage. And it's all about being behavior driven. So we build estimated value models to score users on every touch point they have online and offline. And this is something that you should be looking to achieve in the future. But as Chris said, you're not going to jump to it straight away. It's where you should set your aspirations. And we'll come to this in more detail as we go through. So breaking this down into sort of two main sections, actually. On the left-hand side here, we've got the first bit that I'm going to run through, and that's, well, how do you get profit into your digital marketing strategies? You know, looking at it from a single product value, and really what I mean there is, if a transaction went through right now, how much profit did you actually make from a margin, delivery, and returns perspective? But also a future product value, which is obviously what really drives a lot of retailers, is that lifetime value aspect. What was the value of a new customer? How many new customers do you need to actually grow? How do cross sales impact their value, and how does that change by product type? And these two are intrinsically linked together, because really you're bringing profit in here, and you can build your whole strategy and really pivot once you can actually see where that profit is. And only then should you start looking at, well, how do I attribute value towards those new customer sources, and how do I start to value those behaviors? And we'll come on to that later. So I didn't want to put any client data in front of you guys today. Obviously, that's sort of private information. But what I've done is I've extrapolated an example of what it might look like, and I'm sure you guys will be familiar with seeing this kind of data through perhaps your PPC campaigns, for example. So on the right here, we've got PPC campaigns that have been grouped up into different product categories. That's a very normal way for a PPC campaign to be run. And what you'll typically find is you do have performance that differs quite considerably between these categories. Usually you've probably got a product group that's sort of leading the ROAS charge. You're probably spending most of your money there, driving the majority of your revenue, and you've got these other ones that maybe are performing at a bit of a loss from your perspective, but you need to push out the products because they're taking up store space, for example, or stock space. And the key thing really to address this straight away is that you end up in a situation where your digital marketing team is using a blended ROAS target across all these categories. You know, maybe it's a 500% ROAS target in this case. And that's really not the right thing to do, because the value of each individual product type does change significantly. And the reason it changed significantly is because of things like margin, but also delivery, returns. And the key thing to stress here is that whilst margin numbers can look really similar, you know, the difference between a 35% and a 25% margin doesn't look like a lot. The impact on your profit that you make at the end is substantial. You actually make 40% more profit by selling that 35% margin product there. And this is the information that needs to be at the fingertips of your digital marketing strategists, really. When they're working out how should we be investing our budget on, say, PPC, or when they're prospecting your products, they should be thinking about, well, what's actually going to make the most profit at the end of the day. And we see some interesting things actually when we add in things like delivery and discounts, because what I found when I do this kind of analysis for clients is that we might set a ROAS target based on an assumed margin, but actually quite often the products that you're selling the most through PPC, for example, might be those with free delivery or heavy discounts applied to them. And you're sort of not actually aligning properly to what the true margin of that product is if you don't include that in your calculation. And I've seen cases where we're spending millions of pounds to promote products that actually cannot be sold profitably as a result of delivery having such a big impact on them, particularly in sort of the furniture industry. And once you see this information, it can dramatically change how you price your products and your whole business strategy around that. So if we were to apply these margins to the revenue that we've got at the moment, we can see straight away that it does change our view quite a bit. And if you were to give this information to your digital marketing team, straight away they can actually see that there's more opportunity there in t-shirts than they probably would have thought. If they had a blended ROAS target of 500%, they'd actually be looking to pull back, which isn't the correct thing to do whatsoever. And when you do this experiment with your own data, you will absolutely see that ROAS and ROI from a profit perspective do not line up a lot of the time. Obviously, margin is only one piece of the puzzle. The next stage is actually returns, which particularly in the fashion industry is a huge impact here. I've given dressers a massive return rate here, because we know from working with our clients that we quite often see that, and you might end up in a situation where you're actually losing money from a returns perspective after you've captured in margin as well on some of your campaigns. And this might be as far as you can go with your business. If you're not selling products that have an intrinsic lifetime value to them, maybe they're high value one-off purchases rather than a smaller value commodities where you expect someone to buy 3-4 times a year, then the next stage for you is to calculate your break-even ROAS targets off the back of this, which can absolutely be done. And because what we're doing here is we're actually valuing every GA transaction that goes through, we can calculate break-even ROAS targets in just about any segmentation that you want to do. I mean, you can look at it from a landing page perspective for organic search, for example, and optimization that way. But essentially what you want to do at this point then is you've calculated your break-even ROAS based on returns, delivery, margin, and you can now feed that into your PPC teams. And you haven't had to upload anything into GA, for example. You've done this calculation all off a one-off data extract that allows you to completely pivot your strategy. And you might find that you make pricing changes. You might find that you completely flip where you're investing your budget. We have seen that happen before as a result of this. And really, you can't be optimizing towards profitable growth for your business unless you're looking at this view. Now, many retailers do have a lifetime value aspect where new customer growth is essential, and actually understanding the value of a new customer and how that changes based on what was in the basket when they actually became a new customer is crucial. What we typically find, but not always, is that when we factor in lifetime value, that we do actually see a positive ROI across most sources of sales. And the question really then becomes, okay, then, well, how much do you want to invest to grow this year, and how much do you want to invest to grow next year? Because you can calculate the lifetime value and ultimate lifetime profit on multiple timeframes, 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, etc. And this is really what your digital marketing team should be discussing with you. It's not necessarily how do we hit our weekly sales target. It's how do we hit our sales target in 6 months from now? How many new customers did we drive today? How much did we spend to acquire them? Was that the right amount of money to spend to acquire them? And you can unlock all this data, just all this information with your first-party data. It sounds more complex than it is. I've drawn this very simple diagram to sort of show you how you actually achieve that. Because what we find is a lot of clients, they have the idea of, let's put everything where our CRM is. Let's bring GA performance into CRM, and let's try and get our margins in there as well. And it's not a bad idea to start there, but actually it's by far and away not the most effective, and it's not the direction that we would recommend you go in. Really what you want to be doing is using somewhere where you can centralize your data, like Google BigQuery, but it doesn't have to be. Azure is another example that you could use, for example. But we recommend Google BigQuery because it has so many native connections to the digital space, really, obviously GA, Google Ads, Bing, etc. It's very easy to get your digital marketing data into there. So straight away, you already know every transaction that's going through the website, how it was sold, how much money you spent to achieve that. The next step is to get an extract from your CRM, and for some CRMs that's actually really simple. Salesforce, Shopify, for example, they've all got native connectors. For others, there might be a bit of work that needs to be done, but most importantly, the key thing is to walk before you run. Don't try and automate these processes. Do a one-off extract of data, go into your CRM and download that data and put it into this data warehouse, so that you can say, actually, based on the last years of data, this is how much profit we made through these various campaigns. This is how much we should be investing today. And you can run your business off the back of that for the next 3-4 months, because the data is not going to change that much. And then you can do the process again, and then you can get to a point where you're seeing the value and you want to automate it. And that's where some of the complications occur that can put clients off doing this. The last bit down there I've got is supplemental feeds. So obviously a key thing to achieve this is to get your margin data, some logic around how you actually charge delivery, because delivery is not the same for products, which is an easy generalization to make, but it really can change. And also things like returns data if you don't have that in your CRM. And we recommend things like Google Sheets. It's really simple actually for someone in the business to take a download of, here's every product SKU and here's the price of those product SKUs on this day, and just put it into a Google Sheet. And then you can actually easily automate storing that data in BigQuery, and you take a snapshot on this day, this was my margins. And it's not complicated. You just need to hire the right people who can actually do this for you, and you can get to a great spot of actually having a profit injected into your digital marketing there. So we talked about the first two sections there. How do you get profit into digital marketing? What do you need to do? Where does the data exist? How should you be storing that data? And that's put you in a great spot where you're actually in the next stage of saying, well, let's automate this data warehouse. Let's build a system that allows us to attribute profit throughout that whole user journey. And that's what we're going to touch on next. So how do you attribute new customer sources, and where does behavior really fit into that? So to give you an example of that, I wanted to run you through maybe a typical customer journey, because we can't often think about customer journey as, well, how many touch points did they have before they purchased? But a customer journey goes over years. It's not a singular purchase. Here's an example of that. So you've got a first interaction here where they've come through Facebook and they've viewed a few products. And it's really important that we stress that they viewed a few products, because that's a behavior that you want to emulate. If you had a shop and you had a display on your window that attracted a lot of people to come through into the store, that display has done its job. It wasn't necessary to sell the products that were on the display. It was to get those people to come through and look at your products in the first place. If they came onto the website and they bounced straight away, well, that wasn't the right person. Facebook didn't do its job there. So they came through, they looked at a few products, and then they came back and they came through PPC Generic and signed up to a newsletter, which is obviously fantastic, because you've just acquired their email address, which means that you can join that customer's journey up. Every time you get any information from a customer that is identifiable to them, you need to create what's called a soft login, where you can say, okay, store that customer, that client ID for GA. We're going to use that again later on, so we join that user journey back up. They then come back through Facebook remarketing, and they reach the checkout phase. And this is really common. We see quite often actually that Facebook is great at getting someone to add to cart, get to the checkout phase, and then they don't purchase, which is actually the same issue with the newsletter there, where you've now probably just got their email address. So if you use a soft login solution, you can join that user journey all the way up to purchase, regardless of a cookie issue. You know, the cookies could completely drop, and as long as you've got their email address, you can join that back up. And they've finally purchased. It's a direct purchase, and probably actually, it doesn't matter if you used first click or last click, you probably now just attributed that to direct because of how the cookies lined up. Maybe you've got it onto PPC Generic there. But it doesn't end there. That user journey keeps going. Maybe 3 months later, they come through shopping, they look at products again, and then they purchase through organic search, and then another 6 months later, they purchase direct. So what you've got here is actually 3 purchases in this user journey, and we shouldn't just be talking about the first one or them individually. So how that looks is 3 sales there. But more importantly, from GA's perspective, which is really how the vast majority of businesses are optimizing their investment, there's 5 users here for 3 sales and 1 customer. And that's the problem that retailers, particularly given the nature of having multiple sales throughout the year, really have to solve. And user 2 here is particularly highlighted, because what we find is when someone comes through a social media platform like Facebook, what happens is within Facebook, it loads the browser, the Facebook browser. So Safari gets loaded, for example, within Facebook. It's not the same as Safari that's on the actual mobile device itself. It has a different set of cookies. So even if that person came back through their browser 10 minutes later, it would be 2 different users because it's not the same cookie. And that's why these soft login implementations that I mentioned earlier are absolutely critical to joining this journey up. But this is what needs to be in our mind the whole time. How do we build a data warehouse that allows us to turn these 5 users into 1 customer who bought 3 times? And how do we attribute that value correctly so that we can say how much we should be spending on Facebook at the very beginning for people who viewed products? GA4 is part of the solution. It's going to be a major driving force, really, of Google's attempt to get around cookie limitations in the future. So if you're not on GA4 right now, you absolutely should be, because you want to be getting that historical data being collected right now, really. I mentioned soft login a few times there. That's absolutely essential to joining up some of this user journey. If someone has given you an email address, a phone number, doesn't matter what it is, you need to have a data warehouse that joins that together and says, oh, that's the same person, give them the same client ID. Things like consent mode will help you model your data a bit better with GA4, but ultimately the reason we're doing all of this to join up that user journey is so that we can get onto behavioral modeling and estimate the value of a user based on the behaviors that they are exhibiting And that's a much more powerful attribution modeling, much more powerful attribution model than simply trying to build a last click or first click model. So for us to actually build a strategy around new customer acquisition, these are the 3 things we need to do. We need to join up the user journey at every identifiable touch point. We've covered that. The next step is we need to actually push that information back into the platforms. You quite often see that there'll be a dashboard somewhere within a business that says, this is how many new customers we need, this is how much we're spending to acquire a new customer. But the digital marketing team does not have access to that information because it doesn't exist in GA, it doesn't exist in Google Ads or Facebook. So they can't actually optimize towards spending £30 to get a new customer, for example. So that's a really critical step to achieving this. And then the next one is, well, let's predict the value of those customers based on their behaviors. When a new customer does buy, how much were they worth? How did their value change based on the user journey that they had so far? So behavior modeling is essentially using machine learning to analyze millions of permutations of events, touch points that have happened. We'll probably look, you want to be looking at least a year's worth of data, so you've got seasonality, because a customer's intent changes dramatically throughout the year. If it's Black Friday, although those interactions that happen on Black Friday are not the same as, say, February or March. And what you're doing is you're essentially bucketing people where you're saying, here's 10,000 people that followed the exact same path through my business, and on average, they were all worth £6 each, for example. And you can feed that through and you can optimize against that. And what you're essentially doing is for every user, their value changes based on the actions they take and the touch points they have. But most importantly, we're not actually just building an attribution model for the first sale, because as we saw earlier, a customer's journey is more than one sale. We're actually modeling the value of future customers, people who haven't purchased yet, and also existing customers. Someone who purchased yesterday, what is their expected lifetime value? If they come back onto the website tomorrow, how does that change? And the whole point of doing all this is to pivot your business so that you're no longer optimizing towards a ROAS target, towards revenue, which isn't aligned to your margins, your lifetime value, your customer requirements, and instead align your business towards a predicted lifetime value, a predicted profit, really, so that you can build a strategy that isn't trying to hit this week's target, but it's trying to hit this week's target next year. So what are the benefits of these estimated value models? They do sound quite complex, but there's some really key things that come out of it. What you're actually doing is you're deriving audiences. So because you're scoring every single user that your business engages with, whether or not it's offline or online, you're able to bucket those people. Everyone is worth on average £6 each goes into a bucket compared to £3 each, and that changes your email strategy, your Facebook strategy, for example, anywhere where you're essentially targeting those people. Optimization and bidding is obviously an absolute essential piece here. Every time you build something like this, you need to push it back through into the platforms so that they can actually optimize towards it. And what you'll do is you'll create an ROI target to hit a certain amount of assumed future profit. And that allows you to then talk about, well, how much should I be investing today? Attribution, you're no longer trying to take one transaction and say, well, how should I weight that against the various touch points, and how do I join those touch points up? Instead, you're saying, well, this future person is probably going to be worth X based on the historical knowledge we have of people who do that. And it allows you to get around cookie limitations. You can't join up every user journey, but behaviors don't necessarily change. So whilst a user journey might not be completely joined up, if they're exhibiting behaviors that are similar to those who you were able to join up, you can still value them correctly. And lastly, you get projections and forecasts out of this. What we're actually doing here is we're taking a single group of users, really, and we're putting value against them and tracking them through their life. And you can confirm whether or not you were correct because you track a projected value against an actualized value. You might say this person's probably on average this group of people are going to be on average worth £100,000. Let's track them over the next 6 months and see if we were correct. So what does it really look like when we're building these? This is an individual person essentially who's having various touch points with your business, and at each stage, the model is crunching millions of permutations of people and saying, oh, there's 100,000 people who all came to the homepage. On average, they're worth 50p, and then maybe they've gone through to product A, and actually of the 500,000 people who did that, on average, they're worth £1.75, and now they've just clicked to read more, or maybe they've come back a week later and now they're worth £3.66, for example. And it gradually increases their value based on other people's behaviours. But it can also go down. if there is a certain behavior that happens on your website, maybe it's going through to a cancellations page or whatever it might be, that typically when people do that, they don't purchase, or they return a purchase. If they come to the returns page and they're going to return that purchase, and we know they're not worth money to us, we can actually start declining the value of that particular user and their journey. To sum it up and really give you guys a blueprint for what you should be doing next, and to put this whole webinar into a few boxes essentially. Start off, we change our nascent now to our foundations that we want to build the business on, to say, well, let's calculate static profit-driven KPIs. What is £1 of spend worth to us in terms of profit? How does that change based on lifetime value, margins, products, etc.? Let's feed that into the PPC strategy today, so that we can now change how much we're investing. The next step is to say, okay, then, well, we've worked out what profit looks like, but that doesn't necessarily tie very well to Facebook's prospecting, for example. But actually, we can look at the subset of users who do behaviors that we like. Say, for instance, viewing multiple products is a really common one within retail. You'll find actually that probably 80% of your revenue through your website is driven by the people who view 4 or more products. That's a really common one, or 3 or more products. So you can put a value on that that's based on profit, and say, okay, then from now on, my Facebook prospecting is not targeting a transaction. It's spending £2 to get someone to view 3 or more products, for example. And you can join all that up so that it makes sense, and you haven't had to do any complex data modeling. You haven't had to build a data warehouse at this stage to achieve that, but you've pivoted your business onto profit. The next stage is that data warehouse creation. So joining your CRM together with GA and starting to enable those cloud-based solutions so that you can bring predictive modeling in. And then lastly, you get into a point now where you're valuing every single touch point that happens, online, offline. You can build decaying models where you might have a customer who's bought from you 3 times, but then you don't hear from them ever again, and we decay their value down to 0 as a result of that. And you can really start to understand the future value of your business as a result of that, and who you need to be engaging to get them back on track again. This is the future. There are definitely businesses that are already doing that today. We work with some of them. We know of others who are definitely doing it, like Matalan, for example. And it's where you want to set your aspirations. But these 3 steps that happen before them, they're the steps that you want to be taking to get to that stage where you're scoring every single user in your ecosystem of your business. And I will pass on to Chris now.
Yeah, thanks very much, David. So I guess just to come back to that stat that we looked at the beginning, and why this is all important, those companies that have embraced, the use of data and are on that path towards digital maturity from that BCG report, those that have done that are experiencing pretty significant increases in revenue with an even more significant reduction in marketing spend. So it is, it's a very pertinent topic. These are the kind of conversations that we're having with most clients at the moment, and it's really shows the value in just getting yourselves on that journey. Yes, it can be a long journey, and yes, if you're starting at the bottom of the mountain, it may look like quite a task to climb up to the top. But if you just move on to the next slide there, David, I think it's a bit of a summary of some key takeaways. So yeah, I guess the key takeaways would be that profitable growth is a major challenge. If you are in the retail space, you kind of have to assume that you're competing against a lot of people, and everybody is pretty good at digital marketing that you're going up against. It's not like maybe 10 years ago or so where you had some people that were light years ahead of others. Everybody's pretty good. Either they have pretty good internal teams, or they've got pretty good agencies that they're working with, and you're not going to get a huge incremental value, a huge incremental change from just doing a little bit better than before, which means that achieving that profitable growth in a really competitive market is challenging. The way to do that, the way to break through that ceiling, really is to look at unlocking the value of the data that you have in your business. You've got loads of data online, offline, sat there, and it's only by unlocking the power of that data that you can outperform everybody else who isn't doing that and break through that kind of profitable growth ceiling. Those companies that have done that, as we can see from the study, are really outperforming the competition. And the biggest takeaway that I would give, this is based on our own personal experience of working on these kind of projects for quite a few years. It's a process. You know, there's a journey that you have to go on. If you look at it from the bottom of the mountain and think about the fact that you need to get to the top, it can be quite off-putting. You know, it's quite a significant investment in time and resources to get there. But you don't need to be at the top of the mountain on day one. You know, you just by taking the first step and doing better today than you were doing yesterday and taking that kind of iterative approach, you can immediately start to see incremental gains. Yes, have the roadmap. Yes, you know, start to plan for the future to move towards that full multi-moment model where you're doing things like, you know, predicted lifetime value, etc. But you don't need to be doing that today in order to make, you know, better returns from your digital than you were making yesterday. That would be the key takeaway. I've just noticed actually there's a question that's come through which I guess relates to that as well, which I'll pick up now, which is, so what's the biggest challenge that you typically find in doing this kind of thing? So one thing that I would advise is, you know, I assume the people on the online here are, you know, digital marketing or e-commerce people. This needs to be a business-wide initiative or a business-wide conversation, and it does need senior stakeholder buy-in across multiple departments. You know, if you're just approaching this within digital marketing, you know, you've got your own project of tying together all your data and leveraging it, you need IT, you need tech people's buy-in to actually achieve it, because there's a big data component to it and a big technology component to it. What we have seen quite a lot is that, you know, you've got maybe a digital department on one side of the business, and you've got you know, a tech department on the other side of the business, and quite often they're both working on this type of project separately. You know, what you don't want to get to is IT, tech, data, whoever it is on the other side of the business, doing a project to consolidate customer data into one place, to you know, to start to look at lifetime value, to start to look at audience segmentation, and build what is a fantastic solution, but doesn't actually allow you to leverage that data in the right way to activate it across your digital channels, and we see that quite a lot. So yeah, the biggest challenge I'd say we've seen is just getting that, you know, you need to look at it from the top down as a business, rather than, you know, in your silos in the business, because you know, you're going to come up against a blocker, or equally, like I say, you're going to find that the solution that you build isn't fit for the other side of the business, and vice versa, and you kind of get stuck with that. That was one question. Let's see if there's another one. All right, so there's so much stuff that you've been through that we could do. If there was one thing that you could suggest we start with, what would that be? And I think I'm going to hand over to David on that one.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the key thing to start with is profit. There's a real temptation to just try and attribute first, which is the direction for the last few years really in the industry. How do we attribute a value higher up the funnel? But you really want to start with profit so that you can determine as a business, how much should you be investing today? What should that target be? And then move on to attribution after that. So getting those profit figures into your, for instance, PPC, probably your biggest driver there, understanding how much money you should be spending at a campaign level is essential.
Okay, thanks very much. And I think one final one there maybe. How do you start consolidating your data to get it into a data warehouse? It seems like a big job.
Yes, it definitely can be intimidating, but it's not actually as complicated as you might think. If you wanted to do it yourself, for example, it's probably about hiring the right people with a skill set with SQL, for example, who understand things like Google BigQuery or Azure. But there are agencies out there that can help you as well, like ourselves. We have a full data engineering team behind that. Essentially, what it is it's about building as painless as possible a system where you can take data from as many places as it exists in the business and just get it all into one place. And you don't need to worry about how is that data formatted, because that can all be done through data engineering. It's all possible to solve. It's just about moving it from point A to point B, and that's the bit you want to focus on.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, Dave. And then maybe one final one. There was a question around GA4. So GA4 was mentioned as a partial solution to joining the customer journey. How does this work, and how should we set it up? So yeah, there's a lot of talk around GA4 at the moment. Given that Google announced a couple of months ago that they were sunsetting Universal Analytics, and everybody was going to have to move to GA4 next year. So yeah, is it worth? Could you pick that up, Dave, as a question? You know, how does that help as part of the journey, and you know, should people be moving to GA4 as of now?
Yeah, definitely. So GA4 isn't necessarily feature complete, but you absolutely want to be moving on to it now so that you've got that historical data. The key thing that GA4 is trying to achieve is it's removing some of the limitations that Google has had with the existing previous GA4, the GA implementation. But it's also allowing them to get around cookies by using the vast data that they collect on users to join up those user journeys. You know, for instance, if you're signed in on YouTube on one device, Google on another, Gmail on another, it's starting to use that information to actually join that user journey so that multiple cookies can become one. And that's really powerful. It's not necessarily something that you can even get around without using something like GA4.
Perfect. Okay, thanks very much. I think that's all we've got time for today then. There's no more questions come through after that. So I will just say thank you very much. Thanks for your time. Thanks for attending. Hopefully you found that useful. If you would like to have a follow-up conversation, by all means, get in touch. We'll share around, I believe, the slides, or there'll be a link to the recording put on the website, I'm pretty sure. And yeah, like I say, get in touch if you've got any questions, if you've got any challenges, anything you think we might be able to help with, more than happy to have a chat. But yeah, thanks again. Hopefully you found that useful, and look forward to hopefully seeing you again soon. Thanks very much.